Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, cinematographer Lachlan Milne, joins us to talk about his work on Minari. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode, so make yourself comfortable and pour yourself a glass of mountain water as we jump into the conversation with Lachlan. Thanks for joining me today, Lockie.
Pleasure, Bob. Thanks for having me.
No, it's great. I'm really excited when you got back to me and when you were like, yeah, I could do it next week. I was a bit taken aback because I haven't seen Minari yet. And
oh, right. Oh, you still haven't seen it, or you have?
I've seen it. But when I originally contacted you, you said, yeah, I'm free
right.
straight away. And I was just like, oh, I didn't expect this. I haven't, my screen is not for another couple of weeks now. And
yeah.
I was a bit taken aback.
Well, I'm kind of in this prep shoot mode at the moment. So I get kind of like short periods of time where I'm around. So I just kind of jump on a bit of stuff as soon as I can. But at least you've seen it. I mean, that should make this interview a bit easier.
Oh yeah, but like imagine if like I'm sure somebody has probably done this, that they've probably sat down with someone and done an interview without actually watching it. And
just Googled questions that other interviewers asked.
Yeah, or they've just like read the Wikipedia like summary.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, this one scene where's this, that, the other, and they're just like, yeah, incredible, isn't it? It's like, yeah, blew me away.
But must have been done, surely.
Yeah, but then again, like I bet you people always steal questions from each other, or even like twisted it differently to be like, oh, this is like my question, or you probably will answer some of the questions that might have already been asked. But hopefully, there are some stuff that take you off guard and help you be a different sort of that you haven't answered yet. So I guess the best place to really start is, how did the project come about?
So we shot Minari in, I think it was June, July, or thereabouts of 2019. So I was in Australia doing a Paramount film for the first half of the year. It was 4 or 5 months or so in Queensland with the same production team as Stranger Things. And it was a monster movie called Love and Monsters. And I think it was the last day. It was the last day when we were shooting. And I just kept getting these calls from my agent and then ignoring them because I always operate a camera. So I was on the wheels, we're doing this crane shot, and I was operating the wheels and I had my phone on silent. It just kept going and going and going. And so something was obviously up, and obviously with the time difference and things anyway. So I answered it, and he says in this really, I really like him a lot. He says in this really like droll, monotone voice, it's like, Lachlan, do not go to the rap party. Do not go to dinner with anybody. Don't do anything like that. Just go home and read this fucking script. And I said, okay, no worries. And that script was Minari because he set up an interview with me with the wonderful Isaac Chung the next day. So that's what I did. I went home and read it and spoke to Isaac the next day. And it turns out that, which I didn't know at the time, that I was the first cinematographer that he'd spoken to. I was right at the very get-go of them looking at crewing the show up. And we got on immediately well straight away, because that first call with the director, I always find fascinating because it's not, for me anyway, it's not so much about how you want to shoot the film necessarily or what, you know what I mean? Like I think you're just sounding each other out in the sense that, are you going to be able to go through the uphills and downhills, of feature filmmaking where it's just day-to-day problem solving and people being able to react to the unforeseen regardless of how much you may or may not have spoken about it, particularly with this project that was, a very modest budget and didn't have that many shoot days in it, with a child actor, minor actor who was in, 90-something% of all the scenes, and, the logistical scheduling things that would fall out as a result of that, etc. So, there was a lot of, on paper, a lot of kind of difficulties to this project, but I loved how kind of calm and kind of humble he was, in the sense that I knew that we were going to be able to work through whatever might come at us from the get-go. So thankfully he chose me, and we ended up having a wonderful experience.
Because you guys are going to work so closely together, I guess it's like, are you ready to be in the trenches with me? Are you going to be are we going to be all right? Where are we going to be in this foxhole of filmmaking and creating something?
Yeah. I think so, because I always like to I think that first call is really just sussing each other out as human beings. and then everything comes after that. Obviously there's some talk about, I always like to ask, what kind of film is it? Like, because I've read it and I've got an interpretation of it, but there might be a subtext or a metaphorical motivation that might not read quite so easily to me, that I'm interested to hear a director explain to me, what's the subtext of whatever we're doing. Is this film about love? Is it about family? Is it about hate? Is it about revenge? You know what I mean? That sort of stuff, because it helps me kind of form a better understanding of how we might shoot it and how we might cover certain scenes, what the lighting might be, maybe what the tone of the music might be, which is kind of, that's what's telling you how to feel a lot of the times when you're watching something. So I kind of ask a few of those questions, but yeah, essentially it's like, are we going to be able to go through all this and still have a beer at the end of the day?
When you talk about the sort of tone of the film, and because the film is so personal to the director, did you find, like, trying to understand the story that he wanted to tell, was it a case of when you actually had these meetings later on, and to sort of, I guess you have those sort of heart-to-heart conversations to actually understand what the director wants to say and what he wants to show in his film? Was it a case of like sitting down, getting like a bottle of whiskey, sitting down and talking about like both your childhoods? You understand, like, oh yeah, when I was 10, we used to go to this camp, we used to do this. It was like, yeah, you talk about your grandparents and oh yeah, my grandparents did this, like, so did mine. It's like, oh yeah, but mine did that. Did you ever have those sort of conversations and those sort of moments?
We did. We had a couple of conversations like that. From the get-go, Isaac was quite clear that he didn't necessarily want it to be strictly autobiographical. He didn't necessarily want everything to be like, one for one lifted out of his own personal experiences. There's definitely moments throughout the film that did happen to him, but he also wanted to keep the story interesting and lighter in certain areas or darker in certain areas than perhaps it might have been for him. So there was definitely some creative license within certain specific situations that he found himself in as a young kid. But one thing I remember speaking to him early was about, like, is this a film about memories, or is it, because my grandparents have obviously passed away now, but I remember, like when you're a kid, you don't necessarily remember whole scenes of things. Like your parents might explain, remember, you were 5 and it was that time we went to the beach and then we came home and then you're all wet and so you jumped in the shower or whatever it is. But my recollection of those things are like small little snapshot bits. Like I might remember the carpet when my feet were wet that I walked into my grandma's house on. Do you know what I mean? Like, because your childish brain hasn't been able to retain all of the details of that situation, whereas an adult can tell you sort of verbatim. So I kind of wanted to photographically approach it that way a little bit as well, if that makes sense. So not necessarily be so literal with things and be a little suggestive and a bit more dreamlike, I guess, if that makes sense.
Because I totally understand as well what you mean about looking at snapshots when you're younger. Because now you've got me thinking a little bit about certain things in my, like, if I went to my grand's house as well, like, one thing that really stood out was always, she would be like, I'll make chips. I'll always make you chips. And it's like, okay, but that's not, it's like in my parents obviously never encouraged that because they're like, he has to eat healthily. But then there's also, like my aunt has a story about like when she was younger as well. And there's one that sticks out, and in Polish is called chipsy. And she got chased by 3 dogs and she ran to my gran and said, oh, chipsy, which is like 3 dogs, but my gran interpreted it as like that she wants chips and she got a beating for it because it was like, you can't have that. But it's those, as you said, like there's always those moments that you think about, and you use your experiences from like your grandparents as well when you're creating those snapshots, especially like in the trailer with, because when you have the boy and the grandma in certain moments, I think there's one there's certain things where when they first start having friction in terms of like, grandma smells like Korea, or here you go, have the mountain water that I peed in. When you're creating those as well, did you use your experiences from your life to sort of try capture those sort of moments?
I remember, like, one of the biggest triggers of deja vu for me is smells. Like, and I remember that, like, particularly with my grandma's house, and maybe it's the same for you, if she was making chips all the time. It's like, what that house smells like. What the furniture that's a little dusty, and it's, because my grandfather's been passed away for 15 years now, back when I was seeing her. And And so maybe she doesn't have as much of a need to keep the house as clean and tidy as, maybe it might have been in some previous time. I don't know. But so, so then they all kind of layer up. So that was something that we spoke about as well. And particularly for that, Grandma Smells Like Korea, that's kind of one of those, because, that's something that you remember. You kind of hold on to that one thing, even though the moment itself might not be that clear, that, other senses kind of take over sometimes, and that becomes the memory.
When Grandma Smells Like Korea reminds me of my gran is when you have these cake packets, like for like baking cakes. And for some reason, that smell of that like packet always reminds me of her, which is weird because I don't remember ever baking cakes. It was always my mum, but it was just one of those things. The use of space in the film is interesting to see, because a lot of it is shot at wide angles. So you like, as the viewer, you feel like you're kind of watching this family and seeing like how stuff plays out. Was that something that an idea that was conceived earlier on, and how did that idea sort of gestate?
You're right. One of the big things that Isaac and I spoke about, how we wanted to photograph the film in the first place, was to try and be as honest as possible, if that makes sense. Like I pitched him that it doesn't feel like a photographically showy film, and I don't think it should be. And I think that if we do that, it will kind of take away from it a little bit. And by that I mean, it's not cranes and massive dolly shots and long, complicated, technical, nicely executed things. I don't think that that's the tone of the film. And to your point, I wanted it to be as wide as possible because it's such a wonderful cast, and I love it when actors are able to. For starters, we wanted to kind of cover each scene in as little coverage as we possibly can, if that made sense. And one of the reasons that was to try and help dictate the pacing of the film editorially. And so, I have this big thing that if you don't shoot it, you can't use it. So like if we and Isaac was really on board for that as well. It's one of the reasons why I just enjoyed the experience so much, because our attitude, our aesthetics towards how we wanted to cover the film was pretty much in sync all the time. And so take the caravan, for example, where you might have 5 people in there in one room talking. We would try and be as wide as we possibly could for most of the time, to allow for a little bit of improvisation, but also so that, I love it when people when actors step on each other's lines a little bit. It doesn't feel quite so scripted. People maybe cut people off a little bit more. There's a little bit of overlap, which the sound department are always like, are you going to do coverage of this? Because then we need to get the thing clean. But we'd like, no, we're going to keep this all at a wide shot, because it feels more real. It feels more observational, and it feels more documentary instead of filmmaking, if that makes sense. So we didn't want to have to influence. I didn't want to influence photographically anything that was happening. I wanted it to be as simple as possible, but still in a beautiful, considered way, but not really just coverage for coverage's sake.
Do you think, does that make the job easier, knowing that you have to just do not multiple shots or anything complicated, but just those more wider shot? Does it make it harder for you to like those sort of scenes as well?
It can do for sure. I mean, it makes it easier, I guess, in the sense that you're not as conscious of things like screen direction as maybe you normally would, because you're not necessarily gonna come in and you're not looking, you're not worried, when you're blocking it, you're not thinking about the close-up of that person and they're standing in front of that grey wall at that point, and that might not be the most photographically interesting thing. So why don't we change the blocking and bring them over here and put them next to that light or that window or something like that? So we didn't really have to think about that too much. Only on a few occasions we did, but it also makes it harder from a lighting side of things, for sure, particularly because we wanted to shoot spherical 239, so the frame would be twice as wide as it is high, primarily for a lot of the exterior scenes that we're going to do, a lot of the landscape work. So once we took that into the trailer, it meant that all the lighting that I would do would either have to be practical, because we would almost always be seeing the walls in the trailer, or from above. And my only apprehension about lighting from above is it always feels a little bit like a studio film. If you have lights in impossible places. So I really tried to motivate everything as practically as possible. I built a bunch of LEDs underneath, certain parts of the trailer, so that we could pick out darker spots there and have it all dimmable, and have it, color temperatures a little bit weird, like they always were in the mid-80s. It's like there'd be a cool white fluoro in the kitchen, but the bathroom would have like this iridescent orange lamp. It didn't feel like there was any kind of like correlation between, we'll just get one color bulb and fill it through the house. It's like, it's whatever the house comes with, and that'll be fine. So we played around with that a little bit as well. But there's good and easy and difficult things about covering it that way. But the biggest thing I love about it is just how It's just the observational nature of it, if that makes sense.
Because the film primarily sort of one location. There's that the caravan and then the field as well. But then you also have various places like the church, the hospital, and the shop. But we want to sort of go back to sort of shot choices as well, because in the film there's not that many close-ups. And at first I thought the close-ups, they only showed close-ups when people were lying. But once certain scenes folded out in my mind, I realized it was just more for like emotional impact. I've read that you said that these moments needed to be earned and that you didn't want to sort of overuse them. But what I'm curious as well, because these are very emotional moments, how do you make sure that the camera doesn't get in the way or is too distracting for like an actor to sort of like perform some of these scenes?
It's true. It's a good question. One of the things that I guess part of this comes from doing so much work with kids over the years is I try and not use much filtration in front of the lens for work like that, because it just turns it into a mirror and it can be really distracting. So I tend to do it with, atmosphere or lookup tables or lenses, as far as like the choice of optics, something a little softer or older or something like that, instead of using filtration at the front. But I always try to, because I always operate as well, I always try and talk to actors beforehand and say, this is where I'd like to be. Is that going to be okay with you? And I always get the actor that they're acting with as tight an eye line to me and as physically close to me as they possibly can as well. So it kind of feels like they're part of, they're as close as I am to the event. So there's a couple of little things like that, but it's great actors will always sort of, sometimes if they know that they're going to you're going to go for coverage, they will save their performance for that stuff as well, so they're prepared. It's just part and parcel of the job, but there's a few little tricks that you can do to kind of help both parties out.
I'm always curious to see how an actor reacts like with such a close up and then having like the camera in the face, but then also being able to sort of cry and perform those moments, because there are some of the hardest hitting moments. There's one with the conversation in the bathtub where Stephen Yeun, he can't move his arms because he's worked so hard, and they're having that sort of moment and he's just there, just see that basically like physically and emotionally sort of broken man about like what's going on and everything in his family. Because as well, when we're moving to more outside work, we used a lot of the natural light rather than the lights to sort of shoot those scenes. What problems did come across from using natural light? And did you ever feel like sometimes you were just chasing light to make sure that scenes matched to what you were shooting before?
A couple of times that happened, yeah. And most of the time, I mean, the difficult thing about the schedule of how we had to shoot that film was we shot it in peak summer where there's 14 hours worth of daylight. So, and we weren't budgeted to shoot 14-hour days. And so most of the time we would either pick a morning or an afternoon and favor the work that way, depending on what scene and which way the sun was rising and setting, and we'd fudge dawn for dusk all the time. As far as how we shot the exterior stuff, no, we didn't light any of it, and I didn't diffuse any of it. I think maybe once or twice I used a little bit of fill, but that was about it. I remember we were shooting the first time we shot with Will Patton, which is the first scene we shot with him, was when he's delivering the tractor to Jacob in the first act of the film, and I hadn't seen them either. The props department had given him these massive Coke bottle glasses that were like store bought, because that was the nature of the film. On a different project, you'd be able to get anti-reflective glasses, and maybe they kind of gimbal a little bit or something to try and help us out, and they'd be flatter normally as well, so that they don't tend to reflect everything. But I remember looking at them and I could see the sky to the ground at his feet when I was looking at them. So like immediately I was like, well, there's not very much I could do with that. But it was actually fine, because I didn't want to diffuse any of that stuff anyway. I wanted it to feel a little bit more harsh and top-lit and arid and kind of relentless, because that's what kind of heat it was there. And I think for one man trying to overcome, the brutality of the location, I thought that we'd lean into that a little bit as well. So we kind of kept that simple from a story side of things as well, to kind of help make it feel as hot as possible. I used a slightly different lookup table, which was a little bit more bleached out, just had a little bit more warmth and a little bit of color taken out of it. So just feel, again, it's just so it felt just so slightly hotter than some of the other work. But yeah, scheduling wise, I really tried to, if there was any downtime, I mean, a lot of the transitional shots we did were when we would go from like a split day, we'd go from like a half day to night transition, and there's that period, that beautiful period of evening where it's too dark for day, but it's too light for night. And so I would go take the camera off. Me and the camera guys would just run off and just shoot a bunch of B-roll sort of work, some through trees or clouds or insects or something, just build up a bit of a library of that stuff to be able to pepper through the film editorially when it warranted it.
I just want to sort of go back as well, because something's popped in my head when you're talking about when you're operating the camera during filming. Because I know sometimes there's some DOPs who would just stand by Video Village and watch it through the screen, and then there's like yourself for watching it through the eyepiece. Is there sort of moments where you can't believe what you're watching in terms of just like having the scene unfold and being literally like the first person to watch it on screen?
Yeah, it's one of the great joys of being an operator, I think, for sure. I love it. I love it. It's very hard to not operate on things. The only Stranger Things is the only show that I've done where I don't operate, but that's simply just because of the scale of it and the amount of planning and logistics and stuff. So, and it's actually easier for me to not operate on that. But everything else, I've operated a camera, and for that sole reason that you're talking about, it is wonderful. And particularly because I do a lot of handheld work, and it's great to be able to react to actors when they do as well. I like the freedom of being able to be handheld in, especially intimate moments like that as well. But yeah, because I always wear contacts, I always wear headsets, when I'm operating as well, so I can hear what everybody's saying. So it feels like once you put your eye on the eyepiece and you've got context of the audio going through it, you're at the movies. It's great.
A little private show sort of thing. As well, because it's a film that has two languages, it's both in English and Korean, talking about movement of a camera. Did you ever find it difficult if there were scenes where they're speaking Korean, understand how the camera should move? Or was it a case of just following what the actor's performance was?
It was a little bit of both. And I kind of learnt the latter as the film went on, if that makes sense, because I'd only ever read the script in English, obviously, but so much of it is in Korean, as you pointed out. And particularly, there's quite a few kind of live argument, heated conversations where we wanted to keep them as kind of one-shot-ish, sort of, if you like, and sometimes that was me operating handheld and bouncing between the two people in a language that I didn't quite understand. So I'd speak to the actors, or I'd speak to Isaac, and we kind of isolate. I always knew what the tone of the scene was, but I'd have to wait for certain words that I'd remember, and then that would motivate me to move, say, from Jacob to Monika or vice versa. But that was a real education, because it's interesting. I never operated in anything where I didn't understand what was being said most of the time. But it was interesting what other instincts kind of come to the forefront as a result of that. To your point, you're looking at actors' movements and little hints that they might give you about what they're going to do before they've done it, and you anticipate those. And I guess that's a combination of luck and experience. But it was a real education for me in a really great, interesting way to be able to operate in a language that I didn't 100% understand.
Yeah, because I can imagine that there's those moments where you've probably already blocked it and discussed it, but even those sort of moments, there's certain key moments where you think, should I move it there? Should I not move it there? But
yeah, and the performance is awesome, and you don't want to stuff it up.
Yeah, because if it, especially like a film,
you should. Yeah.
Go on. Sorry.
No. Sorry, I was just saying. It's like I remember there were situations where we'd get deep into this take. I'm like, this is really good. This is going to be the one we're going to use, and I know something's going to happen soon, and I have to get it right. I knew that would happen. That definitely happened on more than one occasion, particularly in the early days.
Well, but that's like the magic of filmmaking, though, isn't it? That
right.
With those sort of moments that you get lost in, and I guess enjoying what's happening in front of you, but then also being conscious of what you need to do and to sort of get it right. Am I right?
Not let anybody down. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Like, I've been on sets as well, doing something like playback and then stopping playback early and by mistake, or running it into shot before they've called cut because you've misheard something, and
yes,
you get shouted at, but then also it's just like, but what are you going to do? Was the movie shot on film?
No, it wasn't, but I'm glad that you asked that.
Well, yeah, because I was curious.
It was shot.
Oh, sorry. Because I was curious, because with it being like a low budget film and everything, I was curious to see if it was just and the shot choices, if it was just a case of if they were shooting on film. I'm kind of curious to know how much was used and how much harder it would make the shoot if it was, especially if you're shooting outside. But if you shot digital, then I guess it makes it kind of easier.
I think so for this one. Yeah, I mean, we toyed with the idea of even something like 16 mil in the early days of pre-production, but we just didn't have the financial resources to do it. We're also working in Tulsa. There would be a big turnaround for dailies, and obviously it was because the budget was modest that we would have a finite number of roles, and we had a child actor in 90% of the film. So like you throw all that together and you go, well, maybe it economically and it doesn't really make sense for this one to be on film. It feels like we need the leeway and the flexibility of digital, which we did. We shot on the Alexa Mini, which I've done a lot of work with before. It's a nice small camera package. It creates wonderful images because, so much of the film was in tight spaces on location in a set that was practical. So we couldn't pull any walls or anything like that, So we tried to downscale as much as we possibly could. So no, we probably, I mean, the ratio would have been way down compared to a lot of other films that I've done. But no, alas, no film, just digital this time.
It's amazing how quickly you can go through film as well. Like, I think the first film that I worked on, I think the producer said they went through like equivalent of like 100 miles of film.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, I just can't picture something like that.
Most of it will never be seen. Most of it will be in a bin somewhere.
Yeah, it's perfect for those winter nights to start fires and stuff. But but it does look beautiful and does have that sort of, especially like the outside scenes, that sort of like cinematic quality in terms of like that film look, in terms of like somebody like Terrence Malick a little bit. It has those sort of it's also like their sort of colors,
little textural moments.
Yeah. Exactly what I meant. But there's also like the use of colors in the fields and in the forest, and even like I know it's an 80s sort of, it's set in the 80s, but it doesn't feel like you're in the 80s, if that makes sense. Because I guess before like 80s, it would be they have there's always a certain feel to it, and they have that sort of nostalgia to it. Whilst here, it just felt normal.
Yeah, well, I guess well, thank you for saying that. I'm a huge Terrence Malick fan. Tarkovsky, Kurosawa, Malick. Just the way that they use the camera as a storytelling device and don't necessarily rely on exposition and audio, and the combination of music and pictures in lots of the films that those people do, I find really fascinating, and it always resonates with me. So there's definitely a bit of that in there for sure. It's also, I guess, it's one of the reasons why it doesn't feel quite so period, is that there's not a lot of other period things in the film. Do you know what I mean? Like we're as to your point, we're in the trailer for most of the time, or we're outside on the land, and we go into the city once or twice really, and we're inside for a lot of that. We do a little bit of driving around, but there's not that many things really. There's not that many other characters in the film. There's not that many opportunities to show outside of this family the period in history. So maybe that's part of it. But I love how restrained the wardrobe was as well, and a lot of the color choices. I think David's wardrobe is fantastic. The cowboy boots and the stripy shirts and all that sort of stuff, I think is great. It just adds to his personality and charm in such a lovely way. But yeah, sorry that I just trailed off at the end.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I'll take it, every bit of information. What do you think was the hardest scene to shoot for you?
Probably the scene that had the most amount of meetings about it was the barn burning scene, because obviously it was a one and done kind of a deal. And we had to shoot it over 2 different nights because we didn't have enough time with the kid hours to shoot them, and then do the interior, but obviously prep the interior of the barn to burn down. That had to be done during the day of the second night, if that made sense. So there was initially a bit of reluctance to do it for real, but I was really apprehensive about trying to pull that off with VFX and a small practical element of fire there. I just thought, for the emotional climax of the film, I think that it would really benefit the actors to have that in front of them to be able to react to. But also, I just think I didn't want it to be underwhelming. I wanted the scale of, the loss that these people had to be significant, because this is, they put everything in there. They've remortgaged themselves. It was this, and then if this doesn't work out for them, then all they have left is themselves, their family, which is ultimately all that really matters. That's one of the takeaways of the film. But I wanted it to be as big and impossible to contain as possible, if that makes sense. So we did it over 2 nights. That was probably the most difficult sequence of the film.
It's always kind of fascinating to see how like the sort of scene plays out and everything, but on top of having fire, like there's the smoke and everything, does that make it like really hard for you to light the scene as well? Or you just primarily want to use the fire as your light source so it doesn't look too sort of, not necessarily like fake, but as in
like a bit hyper real or something like that.
Yeah.
I did lean on that a lot. I particularly for close, a lot of the off-camera fire stuff I would replicate with lighting and flame bars. So when we didn't see the barn burning, but we were looking at the kids in the car or Sunja or David and Monika, I lit that and then used smoke machines and flame bars, etc., to kind of help sell that idea. But when you're shooting fire for real, like the interior of that was all controlled burn work. So I just raced in there handheld. I pulled all the lights out of that and just relied on the fire itself and the residual smoke that created. So that was all, again, just to try and make it feel as real as possible. I just went in there with a mask, and the actors came in there with, wet rags around their face and all that sort of stuff as much as they could to try and kind of control that. But it was hard to see in there, and it was confusing and disorienting, which was all done in a safe way. There was obviously fire extinguishers and everything was on propane tanks, so it's all controllable at a minute's notice if we need to turn it off. But I do like how authentic that scene feels, and there's a real desperation to that. And then that moment where it gets so smoky that Jacob loses Monika for a second, and all of a sudden, like, the stakes are raised even higher, because there's much more of a threat than he thought when he was getting in there. So yeah, no, I was really pleased with that in the end, because it took quite a lot of convincing to get everybody to do it that way. But I was really happy with how it turned out.
What sort of discussions are involved in convincing people to sort of do the scene that way?
It's just an expensive thing to do, and it added another half a day to the schedule, which hadn't been budgeted for. And we had to build it to burn down specifically, all that sort of stuff, so that was a bit of a knock-on effect of that. It wasn't just like, because we had to build the barn anyway, and then we had to make it collapsible. And then, once you throw in special effects and safety and night lighting and, all that sort of stuff, then it just adds up, which when you don't have a lot of money or a lot of days is sometimes tough to get through. But Isaac really supported me, and I just wanted to make sure that we all gave him the climax that the film deserved at that point.
It really does hit home the sort of idea of family and what's important, especially in that film, because you have Jacob chasing that American dream, and he does put his family to the side. And
yes,
it's interesting to see as well the sort of a whole different sort of culture trying to embed themselves into the sort of American dream and chasing gold over the rainbow. So my penultimate question is, how have you found the reaction to the film and all the sort of awards recognition that it's getting?
I loved the script from the get-go, and it was we made the film the way that we wanted to make the film, and to see people react to it and love it the way that they are is incredibly satisfying on a professional and a personal level, for sure. I'm so thrilled for Isaac, because he's one of the great people of this world. He's such a lovely man, and it means a lot for him. And his story is great. He was borderline giving up on filmmaking, and then he made Minari, and now it's blown up, and he's got a Golden Globe. He's gone to the BAFTAs. He might go to the Academy Awards. It's just such a wonderful story for somebody that truly deserves it, who's incredibly humble and compassionate and is just a good human. So on that side of things, I'm thrilled for him, and it's just lovely to be associated with a film that people take a lot away from in a good way. I think the message of the film is really wholesome and solid, particularly in this day and age where people are isolated and stuck in different parts of the world. I'm in America at the moment. My family's in Australia, and I can't get them over here at the moment because of COVID. So it's something that brings people together and gives people a bit of a boost at this time, I think, is wonderful.
When you read online all the sort of praise it's getting as well, it's really nice to see in terms of reading Isaac's history as well, and that he basically wrote it not expecting to make it and just leave it for his daughter to sort of read, and then for it to sort of blow up. And even the young child, Alan Kim. Yeah, just Alan Kim, you see all this sort of stuff online with him and saying that his favorite actor is Sonic, and him getting a message from Sonic himself, and just all those sort of little things.
It's awesome, isn't it?
That's the sort of content we need right now. And I think even his was it his Golden Globe speech where he was like, started crying and everything, just like, oh, hits you straight home and everything.
And was it either that or the Critics' Choice Awards?
Yeah, I think it's the Critics' Choice. Yeah, apologies.
Where he got about halfway through it and then he burst into tears.
Yeah, and it's just so cute.
Sweet boy, isn't he?
It's just that's the sort of like, as I said, that's the content we need right now. And
but this, you got to remember, it was such a small film and made by a handful of people. A year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now. None of which, in their wildest dreams, would have thought they would be on this stage right now. And nobody shot it with those intentions. Everybody that came onto this project came on because they loved it. They loved Isaac. They saw something in the story and they wanted to do something good. It's nobody came on to this for recognition or awards or anything like that, which is, it was a pure concept from the get-go, I think, for everybody that was involved in this. And there was a real family atmosphere on and off the set. We all hung out together. We'd have meals together. It was wonderful. Your cast, crew, everybody. So it was a lovely experience in the first place. And I don't know if that has anything to do with why people like it, but there was a lot of people that went into this. So it's wonderful to see people get recognized, for sure.
I think one of the things that people connect with it is just, I think the way the story is told, the type of story it is, because maybe this is just me, but it feels like film is slowly evolving into sort of like franchises and big blockbusters that sometimes like us as audience members and people need those human stories more than ever. And
100%.
Especially like now with like COVID going on, I think you connect more to these sort of human stories and kind of not evaluate, but it resonates differently to you, and you sort of take more away from it than watching robots fight for 2 hours. Don't get me wrong, I love watching it, sort of thing. But
I mean, your case in point is also probably a film like Nomadland, which is wonderful, which I really enjoyed, which is doing incredibly well at the moment as well. But it's almost like a documentary. Do you know what I mean? It feels so observed and found, which I really love about it. But to your point, it's like life lessons and reflection and self-discovery and all those sort of things in that film, which I think are really important now as well. So yeah, I think that there's something about that, particularly in this time, that people are really desperate for feeling something again. I don't know if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Because it's been so hard for so many people for 12 months now.
I think as well is like you're seeing stories that are not, because I guess in a lot of stuff, as you said, like if you're in a bubble or in lockdown somewhere, or you're with certain people, but when you see these stories of people in the outside world, I guess you appreciate it more, and then you kind of appreciate like what you're missing. I haven't seen Nomadland yet. I don't think that's out until next month in the UK, so I am looking forward to that and sort of watching that and sort of like connecting to that. But to lead on to my final question, what's next for you?
I'm on Stranger Things now. Be on that for a little while. We got a big hold up because of COVID, like everybody else did. So there's that, and I don't know what's after that, to tell you the truth. A few rumors about some things a little bit further down the track, but it's so hard to pin anything down in this current climate. The locations of films are being changed based on how easy or hard it is to shoot there, and things are getting pushed all around the place. So it's a little unpredictable at the moment. So I don't know. After Stranger Things, I'm not sure.
Do you know what? I think I have a feeling that I think I know what might be next, but I'm not going to say anything just in case. Just in case it might be true, then somebody comes after me. You never hear from me again.
Now I'm intrigued, but you will know more than I do if you say what it is, because there isn't.
Hold on. Do you know what? I'm going to write it down because this is just audio only.
I knew you were going to say that.
And I think it might be that.
I knew you were going to say that. No, I don't think so. But that would be great, would it not?
Yes, I reckon once they see a certain other film, I think certain other collaborators. Yeah, I think they'll go for it. And
we'll both cross our fingers for that one. That would be great.
It'll be all good.
Everything's crossed.
It will. Do you know what? I reckon it will happen. And once it gets announced, I will email
take ownership of this moment.
I will. Yeah. This is where it broke, people. This is where it broke. People don't know, but this is where it all became.
I have not been asked. I'll leave it at that.
Yet. Don't worry. Make a few phone calls. It'll be no problem. Lockie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure. Great to meet you, Bob. Thanks for the call. It's great to have a chat. Good luck over there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it should be all good. I know we had a
Man.
little.
Hope everything works out.
Yeah, thank you. I know we had a little therapy session beforehand, talking about my problems. Hopefully, you don't charge me for that. But again, thank you so much for joining me.
I just assumed that that's the majority of the interview, is you'll play that part.
Yeah, he'll be like, there you go, here you go. This is welcome to the world of Bob.
Yeah. No, good luck, mate. I hope it works out. I'm sure you'll be fine.
Hopefully it does.
You always think it's worse than it is. You being the royal you.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have a sleepless night and then I'll get in a message the next day being like, yeah, no worries.
Yeah, see you on Monday.
Yeah, exactly. Here's your contract.
All right, mate.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Great to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you later.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.